Editor, Times Network, Robinder Sachdev, economy and foreign policy expert, Suresh Kumar Goel, former ambassador. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Ambassador Goel, let me begin with your take on Liz Truss. We've said this is UK's trust issue. There's a loss of trust, and the puns can go on, but right now, the biggest question is that is this small U-turn going to be enough? Because if you look at the big picture, she's actually just lopped off one part. And of course, it was the most controversial one because no one likes it when you ease taxes on the very rich. But she just removed that one part. There are a lot of other quote-unquote freebies which are still very much there, isn't it?
Absolutely. By the way, that was a good pun. Trust or trust. The point really here is that I thought Liz Truss, to consolidate her political foundation in the country, she took certain very risky steps rather too soon in the political game. Now, what she did, somehow that reminded me, maybe not exactly the same, but that was so strongly reminiscent of what Rajapaksa had done in Sri Lanka, removing the creamy layer from the tax bracket, giving the subsidies. Now, one can argue that Sri Lanka is a different case altogether, but the fact is, normally in any economy, when you want to rebuild and when you want to go on the growth curve, you provide facilities, you provide spurt to the middle income group, because that is where the capitalization comes from, that is where the consumption comes from, and that is where the growth is. Here, you're removing the cap on the bankers' bonuses, and you are removing the tax bracket 45%, basically, which is all going to benefit only the higher income group. So I had thought that's a recipe for disaster. Now that's a populist thing. Rishi Sunak had said that he would do it gradually, which obviously went against the grain of Liz Truss. She should have gone gradually. She did, and now this is what the UK economy is going to go through. Whether they can go back to the same old path or not is very, very doubtful. My own experience in the economic curve is that once you have initiated a process, it takes much longer to go back to the path than otherwise. So let us see. Let us wait and see. I doubt very much that it can revert swiftly back to the old curve. Yes.
The thing is that can she survive this? Can she survive this credibility crisis? You know, that conversation with Lord Meghnad Desai was very, very interesting because he alluded, I think, not once, not twice, but almost thrice that she will not survive and they could have a new prime minister soon. Robinder Sachdev, great to have you on the show. How do you look at this situation? Can Liz Truss survive this? And what is the lesson for other nations in the world who are grappling with very similar problems?
Thank you so much, Tamanna. I will say whether she can survive or not, or the chances, wait till November. Around 23rd November, I think their budget has to come out, the main budget. This was a mini budget. So between now and November, and now this, I think hits exactly to the trust issue. See what she did. She went ahead with this 45 billion pound, whatever, tax cuts. She did not run it by the Office of Budget Responsibility, which Lord Meghnad Desai was also referring, OBR, which is an independent autonomous agency. What she is promising on the basis of these cuts, they are saying that these cuts will deliver a 2.5% growth to the GDP. Okay, now, had she run this by the OBR and had the OBR validated it and said, yeah, sure, it looks like these cuts will stimulate the economy enough to deliver a 2.5% growth, then she would have had plenty much leeway. Okay, the markets would not have skittered like they've done right now. Now, as a compromise, what they've done now, there are two things. One, out of this 45 billion, what they walked back is around only 2 billion. This upper premium layer tax, which that still leaves the 43 billion out there, right? Now, they've said now that we will submit this to the Office of Budget Responsibility, and co-terminus or along with the main budget, the OBR will come out with a report that this budget, this tax cut will deliver a 2.5% growth in the GDP. Now, if the OBR looks at the numbers and says that no, it will not deliver a 2.5% growth, then she is toast. Okay, because it will mean that whatever they've been saying was flaky. The promise that you talked about, that a politician promises and she did what she promised, and now she's facing this flag. The point would be that the promises which she made were misestimated. They were incorrect promises, which had no reality, which had no basis. So the key thing would now be to look at what the OBR comes out as an autonomous report on the basis of.
I think we're placing too much of an expectation. We're saying that she should deliver on her promises and then also deliver on the promised outcomes.
No, she said 2.5% growth will come. So, I mean, somebody has to validate.
No one can guarantee that. No one can guarantee. She can promise what she can deliver. I mean, she could deliver a tax cut. She did it. The outcome of it.
No, the tax cut was done in order to deliver the gain, right? The gain of 2.5%. If there's no gain of 2.5, there's gain of not even 0.1.
But 100 things can happen. I mean, no one saw a COVID-19 pandemic coming. So, every world leader in the last few years has been saying that we would have been excellent had it not been for COVID. Any sins, if were made, have been swept under the carpet because COVID became the biggest reason. So in that sense, yes, Maruf Raza, what next for Liz Truss and lessons for the world? Ambassador Goel talked about the Sri Lankan example, and the reason why we picked up the story today and we thought it was important is because we speak about freebie economics, freebie politics in the Indian context. We know right now number of nations around the world are suffering from the twin problems of increasing mehengai and slowing growth. And this was one of the ways that Liz Truss thought she could fix it. It's a warning sign, isn't it?
Oh, Tamanna, I've got some very strong views on this, so just bear with me. I'm not an economist, but I have some common sense. And when you read the writing on the wall, the first thing that appears is Britain's biggest challenge in these days, basically based out of three factors. One was their having come out of Brexit. Two, the pandemic and its fallout. Three, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All three challenges were pointing at coming out with a worthwhile arrangement that would allow Britain to somehow sail along in the economic crisis that was staring at its face. But who do the British go and elect, or at least the Tory party? Whatever the racial biases, they elected a person who was good in foreign policy. But today, a month later, they are repenting it. Foreign policy, Britain doesn't count for much in world affairs now. It may be a member of the UN Security Council, but that's a position they elbowed their way into after World War II, and they're not willing to part with it, nor willing to open themselves to discussion for expansion of the Security Council. So therefore, Britain is now facing a three set of options that either of them could unfold very rapidly. One, Britain could have, in the immediate, a massive economic slump, and in the long run, a recession. In between, there would be some toing and froing. But, I was surprised to read some British experts, including Mr. Sunak, saying it wouldn't be a long way off under the current circumstances that Britain would need an IMF bailout. Can you believe it? Britain needing an IMF bailout. And
Maruf, just small interjection to update. The IMF actually put out a statement earlier this evening saying they were glad that this rollback had taken place.
Okay.
And they were the ones who had asked for it a week ago.
With the rollback, the pound has gone just a little higher than the dollar. Otherwise, it was tumbling in a free fall. But now it's gone back to a little higher than a dollar. But Britain and America run the world's economy based on the Bretton Woods system, which allows them to really position their currency in a way that the rest of the world has to kowtow to them. That is going to be one of the fallouts of this. The second thing is, do you know that in real terms, the British are having to pay now about $1,000 a barrel of gas? Unbelievable, because of what the Russians are doing to European gas supplies and to the rest of the world, at least doing to those who are, and Liz Truss has been thumping her hand on the table to say, you know, Russian saber rattling is not going to scare us. But I don't know, it might get her to lose her job. Whether it scares her or not, that's a different issue.
Who will take her job? Who will take her job? Are we seeing, is there a chance for Mr. Sunak to come back? No one is spelling it out clearly.
You see, the thing is that I have had a vague understanding of British politics for at least last 30 years. And when this power tussle takes place, they make sure that the person who is most likely contender is sidelined simply out of vengeance. You would remember Margaret Thatcher going out. Michael Heseltine was a good choice, Deputy Prime Minister and all that. But who came in? Good old Mr. Major, who wasn't even a graduate. So, you know, you have these kind of surprises in British politics. But the other thing that worries me is that Britain is now going to be there are a lot of Indian investors in Britain. And I'm told many of them were pulling out before sunset. So now would they go back or not go back? So Ms. Truss has a very big job ahead of her. And quite frankly, I don't think she's up to it.
You know, Mr. Sachdev, in terms of lessons on how to deal with an unprecedented situation, and here's where you have to draw the line between populism and good economics, which always sounds hard. No one's going to win an election saying that we're going to tax you more and times are going to be tough. But I think this is the big lesson for Liz Truss and the population of the UK.
Yes, certainly it is. But at the same time, you know, I mean, one has to perhaps, you know, I, at least for one, do think that, you know, governments have a responsibility to the social and weaker and socio-economic or some kind of, you know, safety net for the society, right? All governments have these. So it depends how we define freebies, you know, not depends how we define freebies. I mean, freebies is a very vast word. Like this tax cut is a freebie to the rich, to the extremely rich, right? So there are some freebies.
It absolutely is. You know, just on that, one could argue that you do need a cap on energy bills in some categories, because energy bills have grown multiple-fold in the UK. People have to choose between keeping their houses warm or putting food on the table. So you need to help there. But did companies need lower taxes? Did the super rich need to pay less tax?
A couple of things, you know. One, a narrative which, in fact, Liz Truss is very much exemplifying. Remember, she's trying to model herself exactly on Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And she wants to come in perhaps with a shock and awe, one. Second, I think this is an extreme example of wherein you look at a nation as a market. A nation is not solely a market or an economy.
Yes.
A nation has humans and, you know, those various layers and layers. Any country is not a pure, simple, you know, economic structure or a system. Now, that said, what Liz Truss, again, I mean, the chances that she has, as I'm again harking back to this point of fact that she made a promise, and you asked me that, okay, but leaders make promises. Why did the markets skid? Because the markets did not believe that the tax cut that she's promising will deliver the 2.5% growth that she has promised. That's why, you know, all the economists, be it from the leading investment bankers or central banks or wherever, were not convinced of that her promise holds water. That's why they, you know, I mean, everything went into a, spin down or a spiral down. So the point is the next 2 months are critical, crucial for her, especially a lot will depend. You also asked that how can she rebuild some of her credibility? I do think that some of her credibility could come back if the OBR of the UK does come back and saying, okay, you know, somewhat, if not 2.52 or something like that. If it comes up with that kind of a report, she will salvage some of her credibility. Now, overall, globally, from the point of the world, all governments are going too much in debt. too much in debt.
Yes.
Right. There is too much in debt. And the example of Sri Lanka was, as Ambassador Goel mentioned, was one extreme example. But all governments are going too much in debt. They're taking on too much of debt. At the same time, they want to create a social safety net also, or to give out the freebies. Let's bring in the freebies here, right? Which are just political or freebie sops given to get elected. That's a different category, I would say, than the real social or net that is needed. So the governments are trying to span these two ends. Even Liz Truss is trying to do the same, right? On the one hand, she's going total free market economy and believing, by the way, the trickle-down economy effect. Now, trickle-down has, and we've all seen it, we all kind of understand it, but you know what, trickle-down economics, I think the jury is still out if it works. The last 100
absolutely.
years.
And in the middle of a crisis, it might not. In the middle of a crisis, it might not. Ambassador Goel, you talked about the Sri Lanka example. Let's talk a bit about lessons for the world, where leaders right now, political leaders, really have a lot of pressure to assure the people who've elected them that they're going to take care of them at this tough time, and also not burden future generations. Because what happens when you print money and you build up government debt? Your countrymen and women have to keep paying that debt for the next many, many, many years, long after you may be gone. And that's an easy way, right, for governments to do, because they don't have to stick around to face the consequences.
No, I'm afraid that is not an easy way, but that becomes necessary when you actually need to form capital. Now, let me come back to one very basic point. I think the problem that we saw both in Sri Lanka and now the UK, and I think the problem that we are seeing in the USA because of the recession that is setting in, is that the financial markets are not necessarily congruent or similar for the economic development and growth. After the 2 years pandemic period, what was needed was to really put money in the pockets of the middle class where the growth comes from, not necessarily mobilize the financial markets, which simply goes into the stocks going up and down, the asset values going up and down, but that's very fickle. In the case of UK, the same thing has happened. I still don't see any creditable all economic policies there which can actually spur the consumption and the growth. In the case of India, for example, I'm not greatly fond of what is happening here, but nonetheless, at least on the economic front, we have been very, very conservative. We have allowed the growth of debt. We have allowed the growth of the financial market, at the same time keeping a lid on where the consumption is coming from. One thing which I say I'm critical of is that we have completely ignored the lower middle income group in India and the lower income group, which is necessary for our economy. But the fact is, welfare measures become necessary sometimes. UK, the welfare policies are hugely expensive. Maybe they can cut a bit down on the welfare and put a bit more on the growth of the markets and the economy.
Yeah. So tough times ahead. Tough times ahead. It's not going to be easy for any government, but the Liz Truss story is a cautionary tale for sure. Take care of what you vote for. Just because someone is promising something that sounds great doesn't mean it's going to be good for your future and your economy. Yes, Maruf, you want to come in very quickly.
Yeah, just one or two quick points. One is that, you see, if you want your country to cope with possibilities of recession and economic slowdown, you have to collect taxes. I mean, that's common sense. Yeah. And if you don't collect taxes, how does the government put money back into the system? Whether it is in infrastructure, whether it is in a whole lot of measures. And remember, Britain, till Maggie Thatcher came in, was largely a welfare state. She undid all that into making Britain a kind of capitalist model which the Europeans would look up to, but that hasn't worked. The second thing that Ms. Truss has to do is that you cannot work only to win the next election. You have to get your best minds, and whether it's Lord Desai or whoever else from all these institutions that make up UK.
Why not Rishi? Why not Rishi? He may have been her competitor, but he was considered a decent Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, they're always, Tamanna, they're always insecure. He's going to be living next to number 10. And she just may think that he'll walk in by mistake one day into number 10 and show the door into the other house. So those kind of insecurities politicians have. British politicians are no less than anybody else. And so unless Ms. Truss is out, I don't think Rishi Sunak will come in. But I'm not a votary for one or the other. All I'm saying that they needed to have made a choice, not purely on the basis of should we have somebody from an Indian origin or should we have somebody from British origin to rule Britannia.
I don't think that was the basis. The fact that he is very rich, the fact that he is very rich, I suppose went against him.
Tamanna, it was quite obvious. And in any case, we can keep debating about it, but there's no reason
it doesn't matter.
Why the Tories voted for her, and a month later they feel sorry for having voted her in. There's no other.
Well, will they? Yes, it's buyer's remorse. The term is actually buyer's remorse. Perhaps her party is feeling it right now. We'll take a very short break here, but I want to thank all of you for joining us on the lead story. Thank you so much. I think we had a great conversation. We can talk not just about Indian politics, but UK politics as well. But the interesting part of the story is that it's a cautionary tale of what a government promises you and can it really deliver. Are some promises better just as campaigns and should not really be put into reality? We'll take a